I love The Legend of Zelda. Ocarina of Time is the first video game I ever actually played, and since then I've been entranced in the exciting world of Hyrule. While we all wait for the sequel to Breath of the Wild, I thought it might be a good idea to take a trip through memory lane and talk a little bit about my history with the Zelda series. That's why today we are going to be ranking every single Legend of Zelda game. What could go wrong? Get it? Goron? Anyways, I want you to remember that this list is just my opinion, so if you were to rank these games differently, go ahead and leave your own list down below. I would love to see how my favorite games rank compared to yours. Also, I won't be mentioning the old CDI games because I have not and probably will never get around to playing them. If I missed any of your favorites, just assume I probably haven't touched them. With all that being said, this is probably going to be a long one, so I won't keep you waiting. Let's rank every Legend of Zelda game, shall we? Starting off this list at number 17 is a game that I wasn't originally going to put on this list, but here's the thing. I love all of these games so much that I had to find something that I could put in last place. So Hyrule Warriors is taking one for the team. And while we're at it, I'm going to throw Age of Calamity in there because to me, they're pretty much one and the same. I would probably rank Age of Calamity higher, but for the sake of not repeating myself, let's keep these two together. It has always been a dream to play as a character in a Zelda game who isn't Link, so having the option to choose from a roster like this is really cool. The combat is super fast-paced and exciting, the music is super motivational, but Hyrule Warriors lacks that certain Zelda feel for adventure that you come to expect. So yeah, sorry to do you like that, but with such a great list of games in the series, it only makes sense to me that Hyrule Warriors takes up the caboose. Speaking of caboose, Spirit Tracks Chugga-Choo-Choos into 16th place. I'll give credit where it's due. Being able to ride a train in a Zelda game is a pretty unique way to reinvent the formula. But if it takes away from the deep overworld exploration, I am not sure it's worth the risk. I think the boss battles in this game are some of my favorites, but not being able to travel the land on foot and discover all the nooks and crannies definitely takes Spirit Tracks down a notch. Zelda is supposed to be all about adventure, and if you confine the player to the railroad tracks alone, it just feels a bit lacking. Talk about a train wreck, am I right, guys? Next on the list, we have probably the most frustratingly hard Zelda game. At number 15, Zelda 2: Link's Adventure. I have no clue how I beat this game when I was younger, because when I go back to experience it again, I end up dying 1,000 times in the first dungeon. Part of the difficulty comes from the weird hitboxes, which is one of the reasons why I put it so low on the list. Side-scrolling games were at their peak when Zelda 2 came out, and I totally respect Nintendo for steering the series in a new direction even right after the first game. But you can tell this is right before Zelda came into its own. Also, screw Red Moblins. I absolutely hate these guys. At number 14, we are really starting to get into the good stuff. You know when we haven't even reached the top 10 yet and are already seeing bangers, that this series is really unmatched. Oracle of Seasons / Ages is kind of like if they made Zelda games like Pokemon. Seasons is like the Fire Red to Ages Leaf Green. I actually only got around to playing these for the first time about a year ago, so I wouldn't say they're tied to nostalgia at all, but they are still some damn good games. Everything is super cute in the Oracle games, and it could be one of my favorite art styles in the 2D genre. There is certainly a lot to love here, but there's also plenty of things that hinder the experience for me. Swapping items out feels pretty exhausting at times, and having to go back and forth through the menu takes away from the overall pacing in my opinion. Other than that, I really like this game, and I'm crossing my fingers for a remake in the future. Number 13, we're kicking it old school with the game that started it all, The Legend of Zelda for the NES. To be completely honest, I hated this game when I was younger. It's probably because I wasn't ready to experience the absolute pleasures that Zelda NES has to offer, because now I love this game. I try my best to play some of it every year, and it really shows the humble beginnings of what this franchise has become. Nothing else to say about this game that hasn't already been said. Zelda NES is a certified gem, and I'm sorry that I couldn't see that sooner. If you thought the Oracle games were cute, number 12 is like the puppy version. Minish Cap has an arguably perfect art style. It matches the tone of the story and world insanely well, and Link's little hat companion is a top-tier cutie. This is easily the smallest of the Zelda games, not just because Link is shrunk down to the size of an ant, but there is also a lot less to do. In all, there are around 6 dungeons, and completing the game in its entirety would only take you probably 15 hours. Obviously, there are some games that rank higher with less dungeons, but I will get to my reasoning on those later. I think it would have served Minish Cap better if they had a bit more content, but for what it is, it's still a great game. At number 11, we have A Link Between Worlds. I have some friends that say this is their favorite in the series, so they would probably hate to see that I put it so low on the list. Here's the tea. It took me over 5 years to beat this game. Not because it was overly long or too challenging, but I kept losing interest and deciding to put it off for months at a time. I'm not really sure why. In fact, looking back at the experience as a whole, I really like this game. The unique mechanic of switching fields of perspective to traverse is groundbreaking and different, but I guess it may have just felt a little too different for me. Regardless, the items are super fun to use and the world takes you right back to your childhood, even making Flat Stanley a bit jealous. We have finally reached the top 10, and I think it goes without saying that all of these games are incredible in their own ways. If you don't 100% agree with these takes, I can't blame you because I think all of these games are special in their own right. Starting off the top 10 is Four Swords Adventures. Controversial, I know, but I have so much love for this game. What's better than one Link? 4 of them, of course. Having 4 Links really changes how you play, especially with the different formations. Each level is exciting to explore, the puzzles really get your gears turning. The only thing I would change is the multiplayer accessibility. Back then, the only way to play Four Swords Adventures with friends is if everyone had their own Game Boy Advance, which is pretty ridiculous, and it really would have worked without that. Either way, Purple Link is the best, no argument. Putting Majora's Mask at number 9 physically hurt me. When I started making this list, I was sure that this one would at least make it to the top 3, and then I realized just how good literally all of the Zelda titles are. I know I'm never going to hear the end of this, but let's at least talk about how great Majora's Mask is to make up for it. This is the edgy teenage brother of Zelda games. The series has never been this dark and gloomy, but it really works for this one. Remember when I was complaining about Minish Cap only having 6 dungeons? Well, this one only has 4. The key difference here is the incredible level design. Each dungeon has a feeling that you don't really get from any other Zelda title, and by now I know them like the back of my hand. Watching the moon slowly crash down on Earth still gives me PTSD, and going through all the emotional side quests has left me scarred. I'm not sure why these are good things, but they really work well for this game, and that's why Majora's Mask is considered by many to be ahead of its time. For number 8, talk about great timing. Skyward Sword was just announced as a remake for the Switch, and it was one of my favorite games when I was younger. It was the first Zelda game that I got on opening day, and I think I played non-stop afterwards until I was able to finish it. Seeing the remake announced during the Nintendo Direct was really a big deal for me, and I can't wait to glide through the air on the back of my loft wing once again. Story-wise, Skyward Sword brings a lot to the table. It's the first time we see an actual romantic relationship between Link and Zelda, and the drive to save her is stronger than ever. If you have a Switch and haven't played this one yet, definitely give it a try when the remake comes out. I promise you won't regret it. Speaking of remakes, one of my favorite has to be Link's Awakening. I never actually completed the original when I was younger, so I knew when I saw the remaster I had to give it a try. Boy, am I glad I did. This is hands down the best Zelda game when it comes to progression, because the further into the story you go, the more the world opens up to you. My favorite Zelda items come from this game because they seem like they actually have use after completing the dungeons. Here's an example. Rock's Feather makes you jump further, making gigantic pits easier to traverse. The story is always exciting, the combat is simple yet calculated, and Link's Awakening is all around a great game. At number 6, just barely not making it into the top 5, is Twilight Princess. Growing up, I used to call this game the good graphics Zelda, because everything looks super realistic compared to the usual cartoony nature of the games. Then again, take a look at this guy. I can only hope that he's not realistic. This is the oldest Link we have ever seen so far, and it kind of creates a level of maturity that most Zelda games don't offer. The story is deep and dark, and honestly pretty heavy at times, but it always holds on to that Zelda charm that we all know and love. I guess my only complaint here would be that most of the items don't really have any use after the dungeons, unlike Link's Awakening. This glorified Beyblade is literally only used in the temple you find it, so it feels kind of pointless in the open world. Other than that, Twilight Princess is a great game and deserves all the recognition it gets. Before we move on to the top 5, I want to say a huge thank you for all the support on the channel recently. At the start of February, I said that I wanted to reach 200 subscribers by March, and you guys blew that number completely out of the water. Thanks a lot. It means the world to me that you guys enjoy my videos because making videos is my passion. So if you haven't subscribed already, consider joining in on the fun. We would love to have you as a part of the community. Anyways, thanks for listening, and let's get back to the list. Kicking off the top 5, we have A Link to the Past. After Zelda 2 was released, it was clear to Nintendo that it was time for them to take the next big step in solidifying what Zelda is all about. And A Link to the Past does this near perfectly. Pretty much all the elements that make a great Zelda game can be seen here, whether it be a large open world to explore, the head-scratching puzzles, and story of a kid becoming a hero. This time around, Link has the ability to travel to the Dark World, which is pretty much an alternate universe where Link is a cute little bunny dude. This is also the first time that the NPCs in Zelda actually became more than just tutorials, which was the seedling of world building that the franchise needed most. It's kind of shocking to think that this game hasn't already been remade, but maybe it's because in its current state, it still holds up as one of the greatest games of all time. You know what game has also been called the greatest game of all time? In 4th place, it's Ocarina of Time. Like I mentioned before, not only was this my first Zelda game, but it was actually my first video game ever. So as you can imagine, a lot of my experience here is tied to nostalgia. But whenever I want to go back and play Ocarina, it seems to hold some sort of mystical power that I can't describe. Link seems to have the most personal growth in Ocarina, especially since we see him as a young kid at first, all the way to becoming a badass in adulthood. Whether you like it or not, Ocarina changed gaming forever, and it wouldn't be crazy for me to say that we wouldn't have a lot of our favorite games today without it. Moving right into the top 3, regrettably, I didn't care much for Wind Waker when I first gave it a try. I was so used to seeing the more adult style of Link in Ocarina of Time, so it rubbed me the wrong way when I first saw the cartoony style that Wind Waker offers. Well, clearly I was a fool for thinking this way when I was a kid, because this game slaps. Whoever came up with the idea of a Zelda game that takes place in the vast ocean is genius. Nothing screams adventure more than sailing to an undiscovered island, especially when the world looks straight out of a comic book. Although I wasn't open to the idea at first, I have truly learned to fall in love with the caricature style in Wind Waker. Not to mention, it has easily the best story out of any Zelda game. Rather than the classic tale of saving Princess Zelda, the game starts off with Link's sister being kidnapped by a giant bird thing. Somehow, seeing this firsthand hits with more effect, and the quest to bring her back home will keep you on the edge of your seat. If you haven't tried Wind Waker yet, set them sails, baby, because now is the time. Now here's the game that I think people may find most shocking on my list. At number 2, we have Phantom Hourglass, which I almost ended up putting in first place actually. I know what you guys are thinking. Oh my gosh, you put Phantom Hourglass in 2nd and Majora's Mask in 9th? Well, here's the thing. You guys are sleeping on this game like crazy. I would argue that the islands in Phantom Hourglass are even more interesting than Wind Waker's, and some of the characters are the best the series has to offer. In this game, we are introduced to Linebeck, who is by far my favorite Zelda character in the series. Very little do we see character development in Zelda games, but this is the story of a man who only cared for himself, and eventually learns that there is more meaning in caring for others. It's not just a sudden shift either. You can see the change in Linebeck throughout the entire game. As much as I love the King of the Red Lions, being able to customize your ship is also really cool too. So before you go off on me in the comments, give this game another try if you haven't. I promise, it's definitely worth it. Finally, we have reached the best Zelda game in my opinion, and I don't think it will come as a shock to anybody. Breath of the Wild is an absolute masterpiece. This is the most open a gaming world has ever been, but it's not massive just to be massive. Every inch of this map has something to discover, whether it be a Korok seed, shrines, treasure chests, or just beautiful sights. The combat is incredible, and I'm actually a huge fan of the durability items. It makes you feel like nothing lasts forever, and yet still pushes you to carry on using them even though you know they will break. I could go on and on about the divine beasts, the side quests, and so much more, but you know all this already. Breath of the Wild is groundbreaking, and I'm so excited for when we finally get our hands on the sequel in the future. So what did you think of my list? Did you agree with my picks? Disagree? Let me know your own lists in the comments below, because I love hearing this community's perspective on these games. Genuinely, thank you so much for watching and for all the support. We have already reached 300 subscribers this month, so why don't we reach for 500 by April? Thanks for tuning in. I hope to see you next time. As always, keep gaming to the fullest, and I'll see you later.